This is the Backlot 605 podcast, and it is now time for another interview from the Backlot. Welcome to the Backlot 605 podcast. I'm one of your hosts of the show. I am Casey Kelderman, and today I'm back with a new Tales from the Backlot interview. I'm joined by writer-director Aaron Koontz. He is the writer, director, and producer of the latest Shudder original film, Scare Package. Aaron, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me, Casey.
Absolutely. I'm very excited to have you on. I had a chance to watch the film over the weekend, the day it came out, and then the movie is available right now on Shudder. And first of all, I got to say I had a blast with this movie. I had so much fun. This is a very fun watch, and I'm very excited to talk about it today.
That's great. I'm glad to hear you say that. I mean, that's the reason why we made it, was just for people to have an escape and have some fun. That's what it's all about.
Yeah. The first question I have for you, though, let's jump into you and horror. Let's talk about that, because how did you get into horror? Were you always a horror fan? You know, growing up as a kid, was this always kind of a genre you gravitated towards?
Well, it's interesting because I actually wasn't allowed to watch horror films. So my mom, I grew up kind of in a strict Christian home, so to say, and it was not something that was going to be possible. So I had to find interesting ways to sneak around and watch horror. And my grandmother got HBO for free. And back then, overnight is when they would actually play horror films. So I would bring tapes with me, and my mom worked there after school. So when I was done with school, I would go to my grandmother's house for a while, and I would bring blank tapes, and I would put them in and record on one of her side TVs overnight, HBO. Then the next day, I would replace the tape. It had a new tape, and it was always horror films. So I mean, I was immediately thrown into everything. Probably a little too early even for some of that
Yeah.
stuff, and but I fell in love with it because it was kind of that forbidden fruit
Hmm.
kind of thing. And then Jaws was a hugely influential film to me. And but the first movie that like really scared me was Alien, and that I just didn't even know that you could feel that way watching a movie. So, but yeah, I mean, I kind of became obsessed in secret that whole time, and then was always the person who was sharing tapes and talking to my friends and or DVDs later and like, oh, you got to watch this French horror film that no one's seen and that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's very much ingrained in my DNA.
That's awesome. I had a very similar thing growing up. Horror was not allowed in the house, but I was allowed to read horror. Like that was the big difference.
Ooh.
Apparently, it was horror books were allowed, such like the Goosebumps and Fear Street, and those were allowed in my house. But horror movies were a big no. So I'm still playing catch up now, being an adult, trying to catch up on everything I missed as a kid.
Yeah, no, that's awesome.
And you briefly touched on this too. What are some of your horror influences? You said Jaws was a big influence on you. What was some of your influences growing up, and then what was a big influence jumping into Scare Package then?
Yeah, I mean, so honestly, Friday the 13th is probably the biggest crossover film because, as a kid, that was what horror was to me. Like in my head, Friday the 13th was horror. Like that's just what it
Mhm.
meant. And I think I saw, God, I want to say the first one I saw might have been like part six, Tommy McLaughlin's Jason Lives, might have been part six. And that one was so much fun. And I didn't realize, I was like, oh, I didn't find it scary. But then I went back and I watched part two and part four. And I remember I had this reoccurring dream where Jason was trying to kill me, and I would hide, and I was in the woods running, and there was a big tree. And you know, how trees kind of have those like little holes at the bottom, and I would crawl in the hole and then hide inside the tree, and then I would look through a hole and see Jason coming toward me, and then he would start chopping down the tree with me in it. And I had that dream over and over again, and it just kind of messed me up a little bit. And even thinking about it now, it's kind of scary. So as a kid, that was a thing. But Friday the 13th was just this kind of, I would argue with my friends about the best kills, and I always I always said that Jason would have killed Freddy because Freddy be telling a joke and Jason would cut his head off and all that. And, that was my whole take on it. So that was, and I loved all of them. Don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm obsessed with all of the movies. And if you watch Scare Package, you can kind of see that.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that was there. And then again, Jaws was kind of, I didn't know Jaws was horror as a kid. I think would be part of it. Like, I don't think I realized that. So that was, realizing that was horror. I was like, whoa, like this is different. These movies aren't exactly this way. But God, I mean, they're just all. Reanimator was a big one for me too. Just again, this like crazy goofiness of that, I just enjoyed. But yeah, I mean, but I always had to sneak around every time. I had to sneak around, and that just made all of them more entertaining, you know?
Yeah, that story you told about your dreams about Friday the 13th is incredible. Like, I would love to see that in a movie. That's such a, like you said, that's a scary thing to think about, especially if you're a kid hiding in a tree and Jason comes with his, machete to chop it down. That's terrifying.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, thankfully, my dreams have always been vivid, so I use them a lot of times, but I haven't used that. I probably should use that at some point in a movie.
Yeah, that would have fit perfectly in like Scare Package for the tone. That would have been fun. So let's talk about Scare Package then. So when I watched this movie, I could tell everybody behind this movie and in this movie was a horror fan first and foremost, because there is
Mhm.
references to other horror films, but it's never it's always loving the genre, never poking fun of it in a mean manner. It's always having fun with it, and that's the biggest thing I loved about this movie. It was so much fun. So where did you guys come up with the concept for the film? Because it is a horror anthology. You have multiple directors taking on the project. Did it start as a single concept and branch out from there, or was anthology always the go-to?
Yeah, so my co-writer and kind of the co-creator of Scare Package, Cameron Burns, he was the one who was pitching an anthology. He was like, "Look, we had kind of toured the short film circuit for a long time. We met a bunch of filmmakers that we loved, that we just thought were really good at making horror shorts." And he's like, "Look, why don't we just work with our friends?" I mean, and that was a big thing too. And we knew that we could do an anthology on a budget, but I resisted. I just, I'm a big fan of like VHS2 and Southbound, that I thought were like really unique takes on this modern anthology. And I was like, we can't compete with that. I knew that they were bringing Creepshow back on Shudder. I was like, I don't know, this is just going to be tough because, we're not going to have the budget to compete on that level. And then the other anthologies, when you can't do that, sometimes just feel too derivative and kind of, I don't know, the budget becomes felt, and it just didn't have that kind of appeal that I wanted the kind of story that I wanted to tell. But then, he kept encouraging me, and we kept thinking about people we wanted to work with, like Chris McEnroy, who did One Time in the Woods, which is, a lot of people's favorite. It's so funny. It's so over the top. He was the first person we wanted to hire. And I was like, well, okay, well, yeah, I would want to hire Chris. Like, that makes sense. But beyond that, I don't really know where to go. And then I spent an entire weekend. I'm a little OCD, and I was like, okay, fine. I'll really give this every shot I can. And I watched all the anthologies I could. I'd already seen pretty much every one, but I watched them all again, and I created a grid of the highs and the lows and the things that I liked and didn't like, and what were my favorite segments and how many segments and how long and all this stuff. And I kind of came up with a system, and I was like, you know what? I think this number, if each segment's a little different, if we have a cohesive voice, to where they're all a similar tone. And I was like, and then they all need to be horror comedy, because I found out I kept enjoying all the horror comedies, but then it would be weird because you'd watch this really funny segment, and then you'd go to like a wraparound that you didn't really care about. And then you would go to another segment that was great, but it was this really dark, depressing one. And I was like, well, that makes me feel weird. Like, these things don't feel like, I don't know how to, like, I need to stop this movie and watch it in pieces rather than watch it as one cohesive unit. And I didn't like that. So that's why I was like, well, if we do this, it just has to have this original hook. And the original idea was horror comedy, but it was called Tropes. That was the original name of the movie. And every segment was just a different horror trope. And I was like, you know what? That's funny to me. Like, that's an interesting way. And yeah, and then I'm glad you mentioned the fact that, we can poke fun by still loving it, because that was really important. We talked about this a lot, that it was horror with heart, and that, you had to be a fan of the genre. And I will say, I mean, there's directors that, won't be named, that really wanted to do a segment on this, and we rejected them because I didn't feel like they were really horror fans. I thought they were like, yeah, I'll give horror a shot. And I'll give horror a shot was not what I wanted. I wanted people that understood it, that wanted to bear hug this, that really loved where this was coming from, and worked in the genre, showed sensibilities in that space, so that they could tell something in the same that this world that we wanted to create. That's just, people have called it a love letter to horror, and I love that, and we keep repeating it because we completely agree.
Yeah, I completely agree with that too. I mean, in the opening segment of the movie, and then how that leads into the rest of the film, and then it ties all together at the end. And there's one thing I want to bring up here is you mentioned the movie Southbound, which is a connective tissue anthology movie where the movie just flows all together. Each segment leads to the next. This has a very similar concept to that. Was that an important thing to stick out to you? Because your segment, Rad Chad's Horror Emporium, is kind of the wraparound here, and it connects everything together and leads to the final climax of the movie. Was that always a big important part, to have everything tied together in a nice bow like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, in fact it was one of the rules. So we had particular rules that we were not going to break. One was, every segment had to be created specifically for this movie. Every segment had to be able to articulate what horror tropes they were talking about. Every segment had to be horror comedy. And then actually I stole from the Southbound playbook. I talked with Brad Miska, who was one of the creators of that, and I was like, well, how did you all do this? And they were able to have the same crews and all this, and we couldn't do anything to that level. But we were able to so we kept the same colorist, the same sound designer, the same composer. I gave very specific technical specs for how the movies needed to be shot. We talked about composition, but still kind of allowed the directors to do their own thing. But there are folks who are like, wow, I can't believe there's so many different directors, 7 different directors, but yet it still feels like the same world. And that was because we kind of did this show running, aspect of this, where it's kind of like, Scare Package was a TV series, and the directors were doing different episodes, within that same TV series. We really wanted that to be the case. But yeah, I mean, look, part of that, and then one of those kind of adjacent rules was the wraparound story. So I did the wraparound and then the big finale. That if you just watched Ratchet's Horror Emporium leading into Horror Hypothesis, which is like one seamless story, you never left and showed a segment, you still had one cohesive movie that you could watch. And so that was key. And then that way, regardless of how you felt about a segment, you could still have a story that was moving you forward. But it proved to be pretty tricky because there were like very beautiful segments, like the Andahar sisters did a beautiful segment called "Girls Not Out of Body" that was this wonderful kind of like love letter to Giallo. And but it ends on this beautiful scene with these vibrant like bubblegum pop aesthetics and colors, and feathers are falling, and then I need to go from that to this completely dumb, silly wraparound story, and I'm like, how the hell am I going to transition this? And I wanted those transitions. I was like, well, even though we're at a video store, I don't want to just put a tape in and take a tape out. Like we might have to, we'll do that sometimes to kind of illustrate opportunities, but we wanted to go in and out creatively. And so there, I actually took the feathers that they used in their segment and then dropped those feathers like he's hitting him with a pillow, and overlapped the same music so that it kind of, flowed in that way. But we 100% stole the Southbound playbook on how they did some of that because I loved it. That was again part of my deep dive, and I'd already loved the film, but I was like, okay, I like the way they did this. That's unique. Let's find a way to kind of touch on that in some way, but give it our own little spin.
Yeah, and you definitely did. That's the biggest thing. I was very surprised because I do like anthologies when they are separate, but having your movie where it does have that connective tissue, and it's pushing a story forward all the way to the climax of the movie, which is a big part of the wraparounds. I really enjoyed that. And the next question I have though is, so I won't spoil the ending because there is a reveal at the end. Was that reveal always intended to imply where this movie ends up, which is now on Shudder? Was the Shudder always the goal for this movie?
Shudder was always the goal, but when this whole thing happened, this was prior to any Shudder ties whatsoever. So yeah, that is a coincidence that happened. We found out later that there was going to be things related to Shudder to talk as vaguely
Yeah.
as we can. So it's also interesting because there's a couple reveals at the end, and some folks talk about a cameo reveal, and then other folks talk about the Friday the 13th reveal thing. But yeah, but both were planned, but with that in mind though, I still planned on it being Shudder because I knew that this was going to be very specific jokes for the horror community. Like these were jokes for me. I mean, these are things that made me laugh as a diehard horror fan. That's what it was. I was like, what are the funny things, and I think that's also why the folks that don't like it like hate it, like really hate it. And I find that funny because it's I mean, I would hope that they still at least can understand that we're coming from this place of love and it's just meant to have fun, and I think it is. But yeah, if you're not into that kind of, you're not into meta humor and you're not into the self-referential stuff and our diehard horror, it might be a tough watch. But that's okay because it's for horror fans. I mean, that's what it's for. And I think we played so many festivals before the film came out, and but there were a couple that we played, and I mean, we had an amazing response. It was so humbling and amazing. But there were a couple festivals that we played that were not straight horror festivals, just regular festivals that had a horror section, and the crowd reaction was not nearly as high as the horror crowds. So we knew it was for horror crowds. That's what it was all about. That's what we leaned into, and I'm glad that that's who it's resonating with, because that's who it's built for.
Do you have any personal favorite segments out of this movie? I mean, you did,
Oh God.
the wraparound and the finale, but do you have any personal favorite ones? I mean, I think they're all very, very good and very
Oh,
unique as
God,
well.
it's like picking a favorite child.
Yeah.
Because keep in mind, we had so many segments that were pitched to us. There were a lot of directors we talked about working with. We wanted them all to kind of feel different. So it was very specific in the way that this was kind of curated, and even the order that it worked, and kind of the ups and downs. And like, I think there's a type of humor that's in Chris McEnroy's, Anthony Cousins, and then my finale that are similar. So we share similar sensibilities to that, but then we wanted to intercut that with these other styles. And I love the In Her segment because I love Giallo films, Blood and Black Lace and Deep Red and stuff like that. And if you know those movies and then you watch their segment, it connects it in such a unique way. But I mean, God, I will say I'm probably a little partial to Cold Open because what Emily Higgins did there was so unique in that. So keep in mind, we actually did not plan. She just pitched us on cold opens, and I was like, oh, well then that has to be our cold open. And the fact that the movie starts on a segment called Cold Open, that is our cold open. That's about cold opens. I was like, well, this really sets the groundwork for the type of humor that I want to have. So what happened was she having this like really creative idea, and then again, she really embraces the horror with heart. Like, she's so good at that. And the character of Mike, played by John Michael Simpson, I fell in love with, and I was like, whoa, I want to work him into the story more. So after I read her script, we decided to make him a bigger character in the film. So that was all, and that's credit to her writing and what she was able to accomplish. So yeah, so just to have that segment that's on cold opens, and then I was like, okay, well, again, how do you transition out of this? It's got a cold open on the cold open. So then we made it that he had a script, and then have the first lines of Chad be something on the lines of I don't know, man, a movie talking about a movie within a movie, that's just confusing. So we are just slapping the audience in the
Mhm.
face with, like, just be prepared with what is going to happen here and what this is all about. And she set it up for us to do that, and I'm really grateful because I think it elevated the film, and then the way we can bring it around at the end too, I thought was fun.
Yeah, I love the setup and then the payoff at the end. It's pitch perfect. I think the payoff at the end got the biggest laugh out of me. I loved it so much.
Oh, that's so great. That's
Uh,
awesome.
with that being said, do you have any sequel plans for the movie? Are we going to be looking at a scare package 2 down the road?
I mean, I will say that we have joked, Cameron and Alex Euning's one of our producing partners, Sean Talley and Ashley Sneed, who basically all part of my company, Paper Street Pictures. We may or may not have a Google Drive doc that goes all the way up to scare package 15 in like fun ideas of just ridiculous concepts of what it could be and how to keep the story alive. So yeah, I mean, look, in the end, this was so much fun to make. It's the most fun I've ever had making a movie. But it took a long time, you know. I mean, it was a difficult project in that respect, because, you know, juggling the schedules of all these people, and then I wanted to be able to customize things around what was happening. So we waited to do the wraparound and the ending at the end, so that way we could really customize it to what had happened in the segments. But in doing so, that meant we had to wait for all the segments to be done, and, you know, it took a amount of time. In fact, the entire time we were making this movie, we made an entire other feature film called The Pale Dora. That's a horror Western that's coming out in August, coincidentally. You know, a very, very different movie. It's a, you know, cowboys versus witches kind of thing. But, you know, just the fact that we were able to make that happen just kind of gives an idea of how long this process was. So, I mean, I will say, you know, there is a clause in our contract, you know, Shudder could make one. So, you know, and we would make it with them if that happened. So if that's the case, you know, maybe if people tell Shudder, there's a chance. I don't know.
Yeah, the response I've been seeing for the movie online has been crazy, and I know Shudder's been pushing it really hard. And I would love to see a scare package 2, 3, 4, 15. I would love to see them all. That'd be fun.
Yeah, I will say, if we hypothetically, if we have a sequel that we really like, which we may have, idea, we would not be as simple as just calling it Scare Package 2, and that's all I'll say.
Interesting.
It's so ridiculous. It would be taking everything we did, as ridiculous as the first one is, and dialing it to an 11 in every way.
I love it. Next, the last question that I got for you, Aaron. I was just going to ask, what's next for you? Because I saw the Pale Dora is coming out here in just a few months. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because you said it's a very different movie, and I mean, just looking at the poster for the Pale Dora, I mean, I can tell it's a completely different movie than Scare Package.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, it's that's a very personal story. It's a you know, it's about a group of cowboys that rob a train, and then their leader is shot, and they have to hold up in a ghost town overnight. And then there's a brothel, and they kind of partake, and it ends up being a coven of witches. And these cowboys have to survive the night against this coven of witches. And, you know, I think I compared it to, God, somebody forced me into one of those. What is it? Is it This Meets This? And I think I said it's 310 to Yuma meets The Descent, was the way that I kind of
Wow.
phrased it. But yeah, look, it's a very different. It's a dead serious film. It's pretty messed up. But, you know, it's not humorous. I mean, there's a couple funny moments, because any movie can have those. But it's a very serious film and very different. So, but yeah, I mean, I'm unbelievably proud of it. It's the biggest thing we've ever done. And then, you know, Cameron and I wrote that together. We also wrote it with Keith Lansdale, and then, you know, Joe R. Lansdale, the acclaimed author, was an executive producer on it and helped us as well. And I have like a dream cast on it with a ton of recognizable horror faces, and just, you know, faces in the film space that I've loved all my life. So yeah, it's coming out in August, in late August, and that's with RLJ Films, and it'll be, I think it's going to be at some drive-ins and some theaters, and then it'll be on VOD and everything everywhere. And then Shudder will actually also release that film later in the year, but it'll be, you know, VOD and stuff first.
Wow, that's incredible. I'm very excited to check that one out. That concept alone has me hooked and intrigued.
Cool. Yeah, I'm unbelievably proud of it. Again, could not be any more different than Scare Package. But that's what we want to do. You know, we want to make different things, and we specialize in or we want to specialize in genre mashups, you know, that are just kind of different variations of the horror space. So yeah, you know, I think it'll be, you know, it'll be really interesting to see how people respond to it, because I think it's going to surprise some folks in what we're doing. You know, nothing's been released. There's only been like one still of the film that's been released. There's not much out there yet in a poster, and that's it. So, but it's exciting. I couldn't be more proud of that film.
Yeah, I'm very excited to check that out. So that's the Pale Dora coming out August on VOD and select theaters and drive-ins. I mean, just sounding like the concept, I would love to check out a drive-in with the movie. That'd be a lot of fun.
Yeah, yeah. We think there's well, and even if you have to socially distance, in the film there's a thing with these two brothers that are handing back and forth a bandana, and I was like, hey, let's just give bandanas out to everybody as masks, for the film. So we're gonna do that. We'll have Pale Dora bandanas that we give out for socially distanced masks. So yeah, it'll be fun. But yeah,
That's
it's crazy to think that we have two movies, that are coming out in 2 months of each other that took so long to make, both of them. But that's just kind of how it happened, and we feel really lucky to have that be the case.
Man, that's incredible. Again, Aaron, thank you for coming on the podcast today and discussing your work and Scare Package. Once again, is available on Shudder right now, as well as it is available on the Last Drive-In as well. So you can check out two different versions of the same film there. So, Aaron, thank you again so much for joining me on the show. Where can people follow you and your production company online?
Yeah. Well, again, thank you so much for having me. It's been great chatting with you. And yeah, and then after the Pale Door comes out, we should chat again. But yeah, so Aaron B. Koontz, you can find me pretty much everywhere. I'm very active on Twitter and Instagram. So, say hi, and happy to, if you like the film, talk about it. I'm honestly, when there's a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now, and Black Lives Matter, and there's a lot that I think is really important, and it can be depressing, and you feel kind of helpless, and how you're trying to help, you're trying to be a difference, you're trying to be an advocate for change. And I know that when things get tough and I'm stressed out, I'll go and search the movie, and I'll read, what people are saying about it, and it picks me up and reminds me why I made movies to begin with. Was just, as a kid, I wanted to have an escape. I wanted to be able to get away from things, and movies were my way of doing that. And the idea that maybe some people are having that right now with Scare Package is the most rewarding thing I could ever imagine.
Yeah, and I can say as someone who watched the film and had just a blast, it was the perfect escape movie, and highly recommend to anyone listening to go check out the film. And again, Aaron, thank you so much. Yes, we got to have you back on to talk about the Pale Door when that comes out. That sounds incredible.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Casey, and thank you for talking about our little movie. Every little bit means a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Aaron, and thank you all for listening to the show. And we'll check you out next time on the Backlot of South Dakota.